Hey, welcome everybody to this session in Global Veg Fest 2 in December 18th, 19th, 2021. This is a VIVAS session, which is the Vegan Women's Leadership Network, which would usually be introduced by Katrina Fox. Katrina, of course, a founder of VIVAS and absolutely really fabulous contributor to the Global Veg Fest. So it's a really strong collaboration there, which we're very grateful. However, due to a slight oversight, we realise it's currently 3 a.m. in Australia. So Katrina has asked me to introduce this panel in place, which I'm absolutely thrilled to do so. It's a real honour to do so, particularly, of course, because we're joined by three very experienced and knowledgeable contributors, panelists today. Without further ado, I shall introduce, here you go, there's Alicia Live, who's going to host the panel. And we also have Sasha Camilli, and we also have Belle Jacobs. So thank you for joining us. Alicia, I shall hand over to you and ask you to take over, as it were, and I shall be sat back listening intently. And thank you again for joining us, and welcome, Alicia, Belle, and Sasha, to the VIVAS panel on sustainable fashion.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks, Tim, for introducing us, and thanks everybody for joining us today. So today we're here to discuss fashion and the current state of fashion and what is vegan and sustainable fashion. And I'm glad that I've got lovely Sasha and Belle with me today to join me to discuss this. We've all sort of had, our many years of experience in fashion. We've seen sort of the good and the bad side of it. And, we can see there are some positives that are happening, but I think, there's a long way to go yet, to have it to a state that we're all, happy and content with, really. So I think without further ado, I suppose I'll leave it to, let's say, Belle to start off with, to introduce herself. If you'd like to tell me a little bit about your journey. Obviously, you were once, the style editor of the Metro, and now an activist in sort of animal, environmental, and fashion issues.
Yeah, so as you said, Alicia, I was a style editor for 13 years. For Metro, so a tabloid, and essentially, covering a lot of the fast fashion brands that I now find myself really trying to challenge in my work today. I left editing, being a fashion editor for Metro, really very close after the fall of Rana Plaza, which was the garment factory in Bangladesh that fell, taking with it 1,134 lives. It really was the opening of a can of worms about the fashion industry, where we saw that, for instance, as in Rana Plaza, workers were being compelled to, work under terrible conditions to churn out billions of pieces of clothing for richer countries, which the richer countries were then treating with immense disrespect and throwing away. And it continues now, and it's a situation that's absolutely untenable in a climate emergency, when we really need to value the planet and all of its inhabitants far more than we currently are doing. So the environmentalism, I joined Extinction Rebellion in 2018, real concern for what I was hearing about a climate and global warming. Underneath all of that has been a concern for animals. So, but never really understanding the extent to which they were being harmed, for example, or the impact, for example, of animal agriculture on the planet. And when Animal Rebellion launched, I think it was in 2019, 2020, just thought I found a group of people that finally are bringing together climate, social, animal issues into one dynamic package. So Animal Rebellion and my affiliation with them, a bit low key at the moment, but they always have my heart, Animal Rebellion. What a fantastic group of people. Obviously vegan fashion, I never put fur on the page, even when I was fashion editor. But just to give you an extent of the lack of my knowledge of what was going on, I filled my pages with leather. I didn't ask any questions. I had this weird idea that it was absolutely fine. There was no problem. How could it not be fine? Because it was absolutely everywhere. And I think a lot of people still labor under that assumption that just because it's ubiquitous, it's innocent. And it's really not. And I would actually say that my encounter with what was happening in leather was really the beginning of my journey into veganism. And that was what made me question everything about our assumptions about how the fashion industry is run today, the food industry is run today, and actually just how we treat the planet and the other inhabitants on it. So yeah, it's been a really interesting 5 years, for which I'm very grateful, despite all the sadness. That's basically it in a very, very small nutshell. As you can tell, it's a bit much bigger story, but yeah.
Of course. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Val. And Sasha, so, you're a published author, and you founded the world's first vegan online magazine as well. So how have you sort of balanced your love of fashion, with vegan beliefs and, to take your journey to where we are today? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely been quite a journey. So I stopped eating meat when I was 11. And as soon as I knew what meat was, I instinctively knew that I wanted nothing to do with that. I always felt that I was like uncompromising on animal rights, that I felt there was no excuse for humans to abuse animals in any way. But for some reason, it took me quite a while to go vegan. I guess I had all the common misconceptions about veganism. I imagined that I wouldn't be able to find anything to eat, or I didn't know about issues such as maybe wool and other things that I now talk about almost on a daily basis. But when I made that journey, which was, it started out by reading a book called Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, which was really eye-opening. And I decided that no matter how difficult this would be, and spoiler alert, it turned out to be the easiest thing ever, but I didn't know that back then. I was thinking, no matter how difficult this is, I'm going to do it because I don't want any part of this anymore. So I moved to London. I was working as a freelance fashion journalist and copywriter. And I really felt like a hypocrite at the time because such a big part of my job was trying to sell all of these products, calf skin, jackets, lizard skin bags, all of these things that I would never wear myself, and I would like anyone else not to wear either. And I've always been a huge fan of magazines. So I had this dream to start a magazine for people like me who loved fashion, who were really interested in style, but who did not want to harm animals. And back then, this was about like 2012, 2013, like the wave of veganism was starting, and there was a lot of information about how to transition to a vegan diet, lots of recipes, but nothing at all about fashion. Right. So I was lucky enough to work on this project with Marie Claire UK, who had an entrepreneurship scheme back in 2013, where they picked women with business ideas and helped them turn these ideas into reality. So I was lucky enough to be chosen for that. And that's how Vilda magazine was born. It was a digital vegan fashion magazine that I ran for 6 years. And along the line, I also wrote a book called Vegan Style, which came out 2 years ago. And I like to describe it as a book about veganism without any food. That's not quite true. There's a bit of restaurant tips in the travel chapter. But basically, it's a book about fashion, beauty, travel, decorating your home. So all of the aspects of vegan living that go beyond just the food aspect, which is really what I focus on right now, is spreading the message about living a stylish, joyful life without harming animals, doing as little harm as we possibly can.
Sounds amazing. Great. Thank you. So I think, I suppose when people do sort of, talk about veganism, often, the emphasis is on sort of food, I suppose. And I suppose for me, coming from a fashion background as well, it was very important. People often called, let's say, leather as a byproduct of the meat industry, which we can, go into. So I suppose that for a start, we can talk about, I suppose, the current state of fashion. So, Belle, you mentioned Rana Plaza 2013. What's the current state of fashion now, and has there actually been much happening since that atrocity way back then?
So the current state of fashion, I mean, it's still pretty bad. We're producing. I could come at it from so many angles, but let's look at the quantity angle first. We're producing between 100 and 120 billion items of clothing a year. That's a conservative estimate I've now found. Apparently only 14% of brands actually release figures on how much clothing they're producing. So it could be way more than that. Most of it's going into landfill. As I said before in my introduction, the fashion industry is also being credited with between 4 to 8 to 10% of carbon emissions. I think the fact that no one can pin down the exact percentage there is to do with the complexity of the supply chains. They're very dense, knotted all the way back to the farmers growing fibers on the land. We have also issues, obviously, every time you treat a fiber and you prepare it for wear, it's often going through incredibly toxic processes, particularly leather. And so often if these clothes are being produced in countries with very poor environmental regulations, where they will be because labor is cheap there, a lot of this effluent is going into onto the land, into the waterways of people of the global south. In terms of labor rights, some improvements, still not enough, as we've seen in the pandemic. The moment those in the global north feel they can't buy clothing, the people who get dumped on first are the workers in the global south. And I think, and then as it all started ratcheting up again, there was an absolutely I thought it was a really sad video coming out from a garment trade union called Asia Floor Wage Alliance. And it basically showed women garment workers, 80% of garment workers are women, literally wading through waters to get back to the factories to make clothes for rich countries. This is about 2 months ago, with their babies on their backs, in the height of a pandemic, without adequate transportation to try and get back to that, desperately trying to get back to the garden. And no matter how much you say, well, if they didn't have that job, they wouldn't have any other job, which I actually dispute. It was a terrible scene. This is not an equitable industry. This is not a compassionate industry as it stands now. And I am speaking as someone who used to love it.
Yes.
There are elements of it I still love, the creativity and all of that beauty and joy. But I think we need to seriously question its impact and wonder if we can isolate all of that negativity from the beautiful things that we love. It is possible to be creative and joyful without having clothes produced by poorer people in the global south and paying such high prices for it. So state of the fashion at the moment, not enough. Now, there is work being done. There are more and more people like me and Sasha and you, Alicia, desperately trying from inside the industry, good people trying to turn it around. But the structure of the industry, based on profit and exponential growth and expansion into new countries and opening of new stores and releasing of new, is cancelling out any efforts that have made. I sometimes say, no matter how brilliantly researched your net zero plan is, it's likely that you're not going to hit those targets if you're still introducing new lines, and it's just not possible. You're cancelling out your good work by the idea of growth. And I can talk a bit more about growth later on because it's part of a project I'm working on at the moment.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then I suppose what we're looking at in regards to fashion and I suppose sustainable fashion, and one of the, I suppose, people always say to us when we're working in vegan fashion is that leather is natural. It's a byproduct of the meat industry, and it's much better than vegan fashion that's made out of plastic. So Sasha, would you have a view on this for us?
I can't believe that this still is the majority view. I know that it is, but
it is. Yeah.
It's really misinformed. There are a few stereotypes sort of that are difficult to shift when it comes to this conversation. I think, first of all, leather is only a natural product while it's still on the animal who was born with it. Because obviously, as any natural ingredient or material, like leather decomposes, so it is biodegradable, but to keep it from happening, because you wouldn't want it to biodegrade while someone's wearing it. So to keep it from decomposing, it's actually treated with all sorts of toxic chemicals that are incredibly harmful to the environment. And they're very harmful for the people who work in the industry. An estimated 90% of all leather workers in Bangladesh will die before they're 50 because of exposure to toxic chemicals. And I also read an interview with Anya Hindmarsh a few weeks ago who said that most leather is actually coated in plastic. So leather isn't plastic free.
Yeah.
Very, very little in our society is actually plastic free. But leather is very far from being a sustainable material, which is why, for example, the Pulse of Fashion Industry report has put cow leather at the very top of its list of the materials that have the highest environmental cradle-to-gate impact. It's important to consider not only the production aspect, though, but also the entire journey of leather from the animal whom it comes from. We all are sort of aware, or some of us are more aware, of the fact that animal agriculture is a leading cause of the climate crisis. But fashion has been sort of slow to realize that this is not only burgers and sausages we're talking about. Leather is also animal agriculture, and so is wool. Raising animals on a very large scale is incredibly damaging to the environment. And when it comes to vegan materials, well, a few years ago, we did have the depressing choice of wearing an animal or wearing petroleum-derived plastics.
Yes.
Today, we live in such an exciting time for vegan leather specifically. We have leather today that's made from pineapples, from cork, from mushrooms, from apples, from grapes, cactus. I might have forgotten a few there, but the progress being made in vegan materials is astonishing. And these materials are perhaps not perfect, but they are a sign of the fact that we can get there. We can produce something that is kinder, that is better. And while killing an animal, it will always be killing someone who does not want to die. And that's another thing that we tend to forget in the conversation, that animal skins and fur and wool actually come from a living, breathing individual who is sentient and who has their own right to life. And this is something that fashion also has to consider, because animals, just like us, feel joy, fear, love, pain. And that is also another huge reason why they deserve consideration.
Yes, yes. And I think, there was a recent report, wasn't there? I mean, for us, in the know, let's say, about fashion and the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. And I think, people aren't quite making that link as you're mentioning there. So I think, the more we're here talking about and trying to encourage people to make different choices, and I think that that's always a good thing. So in regards to sustainable fashion, obviously there's a slow versus the fast fashion aspect of, let's say, the fashion industry. Did you want to talk a little about that, Belle?
Sorry, so slow versus fast fashion?
Fast fashion, yes.
So, yes, I mean, I think as a term, slow fashion perhaps is being less focused on in terms of, I think we all know that we need to buy one great item and we need to wear it for 30, 40 years, as long as it will last. I think that's true. I think there is, and I touched on it in my previous answer, a real movement to substantially reduce the size of the industry. And so I'm part of, one of my groups is a group which was born out of Extinction Rebellion. It's called Fashion Act Now. And our recent campaign is called Defashion Now. And in Defashion Now, we've deliberately linked the term defashion to the idea of degrowth. Now, if you're a tried and tested capitalist, the word degrowth is very dissettling. It's very unsettling. It's very uncomfortable, because you see loss of profits, but what we're arguing about is that actually, if you shrink the fashion industry by as much as it needs to stay within planetary boundaries, and you pay the garment workers in the global south proper wages, and you learn to consume less as an individual, you actually have more. I'll go back to the word joy, actually. You really enjoy your clothing more if you genuinely value it, if you genuinely see its genesis. So the campaign that we're running now is Defashion Now. It's really about changing this entire culture where you think you have to have another pair of jeans to be relevant in this society. And so I'm very interested, not so much in slow fashion. I still think that exists as a concept, but it's not central at the moment. In the same way as, how do we shrink this industry? How do we really pull back from this excessive use of natural resources or earthly gifts, whatever you want to call them, of the planet itself, of the animals whose skin we use, of the plastic that we take from, the fossil fuel industry to make 69 to 80% of our clothing is plastic. That's not good for the planet or the animals or people. So I think that's where the conversation is going. I'm seeing more and more articles, more and more sort of great panels really asking, how do we shrink this industry, particularly in a way that's just? That we, fast fashion has been responsible for a massive explosion of industry and development in some countries. How do we then go, we need to restructure this in a way that's fair to these countries, particularly because they stand on the front line of the climate emergency. They're suffering its effects now. There's also, if you want to get really, really prosaic about it, a financial case for this. What brand is going to be able to produce its clothes in a factory if it's facing flood and drought? And, these are questions that fashion brands have to ask themselves. And they're, not to forget, we're in a climate emergency. Alicia, Sasha, both of you know it, but, we're headed to 2.7 degree rise in temperature by the end of this century. 2.7. Yeah. We're currently at 1.1. We're seeing absolutely bonkers forest fires, unbelievable drought in Kenya. The Arctic's on fire. It's the most, this is at 1.1, now trying to visualize 2.7. So the other thing about the degrowth movement is, in a climate emergency, as things sort of get worse, who's going to want to be buying new clothes? Who was standing in the floods in Germany going, where's my next T-shirt coming? Yes. We're entering a new reality here. So slow fashion is key in terms of like repairing, using, loving what you already own. But I think we really need to think in material terms about, does this industry deserve to exist at this size in its current structures?
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I think, yeah. And so I think, Sasha, I often, I suppose, when we're talking about rather than purchasing new, let's say, and looking at other ways, as Belle was mentioning, do you want to talk a little bit about whether it's renting fashion or vintage fashion? I often see you with your Depop, on your posts, etc. Showcasing, things don't necessarily have to be new. What other different ways that we could look at fashion rather than through the eyes of having a new item every 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think just like Belle was saying, it's important for us to think about the whole of the industry, and that I think starts with our own mindsets as us as a society, the way that we view fashion. Because if we look back, maybe 50 years ago, people would have some pieces of clothing that they owned, and they would have them for years and years, sometimes for generations. And then now we have a mentality where everything is so throwaway and everything is very seasonal. Fashion is very tied to like, this season you need this, next season you need that. And I've even seen this with some sustainable fashion influencers who talk about like, this is my 30 pieces for this season. And the next season, okay, this is my next 30 piece. And I'm thinking like, what happened to last season's? Where did it go? And I think the trends are, I think, something that's incredibly damaging. The fact that there's trends and we have to sort of change up our wardrobe to fit into something. I think this is definitely a mentality shift that needs to happen. And buying new has been the default for a long, long time. And we've also, like when I was younger, I would go to H&M and Zara and all of those high street shops when I wanted something new, just by default, because I had no idea about the issues, but also because I believe that secondhand fashion was not quite for me. I wouldn't be able to find what I wanted. I wouldn't be able to find anything that's on trend, because trends were so important to me back then. Since I've been in the UK, I've really discovered, first of all, charity shops, which I think are kind of coming into the conversation now. And also, like you say, now with the social media and internet, we have all these apps that are reselling for secondhand fashion. And yeah, Depop should start paying me soon because I advertise them so much. I've really rediscovered secondhand fashion, and like most of my wardrobe comes from something that has been owned already by someone. And I think that at the moment, pretty much all the clothes we need are already on this planet. We don't need to be producing as much as we are. And especially, we don't need to be getting rid of things just because we're tired of them, or because they don't fit a trend anymore. I think the whole like buy and get rid mentality is damaging. Even when I see things like people that have a one in, one out policy, I'm always thinking like, what's going to happen with the out item? Where does that go?
Yeah.
And I think renting is a very exciting development. I haven't tried it myself, but I think it's a very interesting view on owning clothing. That doesn't have to be you buy something, you wear it to an event, and then it's sitting in your wardrobe until you get tired of it, and then you get rid of it.
Yeah.
But also things like swap events where people bring clothes that they're maybe not wearing anymore, and they swap with each other. I mean, none of this will single-handedly fix all of the many issues that we have in the fashion industry. But I think just a mindset shift of always reaching for new things, always having to have the latest trend item. If we get out of that mindset and think about maybe cultivating a personal style, learning what works for us with our wardrobes, and learning to love what we have and really give our clothes a long lifespan. If we have that mindset shift, I think that's a good place to start from.
Yes, yes. And I mean, it's interesting to see, you know, in the main fashion industry, you know, Selfridges and I think M&S and different countries now, companies are sort of looking at renting, aren't they, as part of their offer, etc. So it's good to see that they are starting to think of, you know, a better way of maybe how they can, you know, sell fashion, which is interesting. You know, and then it comes to a point, I suppose, when people say, okay, you know, I'd love to have more sustainable fashion, etc. My gosh, it's just too expensive for me to buy. And that's why they say, well, I'd rather go and buy a £10 shirt, etc. So what are your thoughts behind about, you know, the cost of sort of ethical or fashion, and why the higher price points?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that is still even that's a tricky one even for me. I was So for instance, I wanted some black leggings for my daughter, and as everyone knows, H&M do hundreds of black leggings in a percentage of organic cotton, and I couldn't find an ethical alternative. And I did come across a beautiful pair of black leggings, £75. And I actually had to, you know, my daughter's growing, I had to do the H&M option. The reason for that, the way I do it now is I'm only secondhand and vintage, really, except for basics like those black leggings, because I do agree that some sustainable fashion is really highly priced for me at this particular point in time, but you know, this is part of the mindset shift that Sasha was talking about. I mean, these are items, arguably, that, you know, these are prices that reflect the true value of these items. You know, they've been made with care from materials from our earth. You know, it's the 3.99, you know, $3.99 t-shirt. That's an artificial pricing with a massive hidden cost. So part of our mindset shift, and you know, is that we do need to get ready to maybe just invest a little bit more, perhaps in our big pieces that we know we're going to keep forever. And just going back to this mindset shift, actually, I walked into a high street shop the other day, and there was a sign that said "New season jumpers here" or whatever. And it just did seem really mad for me that we had new seasons where obviously last season was only 3 or 4 months ago, and everything from that season was still intact and absolutely fine. And so I love this idea. You know, it's now, I've come from a place where I used to get so excited walking into shops. I used to get so excited opening fashion magazines and just look, and now they just seem these weird, out of time, very jarring sort of ways of communicating about the world. So yeah, so it's a really tricky one, the cost of sustainable labels that I haven't quite counted yet. But what I will say is their existence is incredibly valuable right now, more crucial than ever. These are the brands we want to see to survive and thrive. These are the brands that are modeling the ethical ways of being. One of the things I really love about sustainable brands, truly sustainable brands, is they often think 360. So it's not just about the product, but it'll about the people making the product. It'll about be the materials. And I love that aspect of the small, independent, sustainable brands. I think that's so key. So where I can support them, I always will, and I always will. But yeah, those leggings, they kind of floored me.
Yeah. I mean, I see where you're coming, because I have two young children, two daughters who've been vegan from birth, and when it comes to going to buy clothes for them, or even just shoes, black shoes for kids is just impossible to find in sort of a vegan option. I mean, as a brand, we did look at making them, but the actual cost of them and then being able to sell them at the same cost price, let's say, same price as an adult shoe, just wasn't feasible, and people wouldn't pay it. So it's a real balance, and it's a real sort of I feel you.
On the outside, Alicia, lots of children grow so fast that by the time they get to eBay, the items of clothing are actually still in quite good nick. And I got a lot of my daughter's school shoes from eBay, and then put them back on eBay, and definitely her winter coats. It's just like items like leggings are quite personal. They're very close to the body. They're sort of intimate, that kind of thing. So yeah, there are options for in certain items for the secondhand market.
Yeah. And I think, for us as a brand, we're always thinking about the end life of a product, before we actually design it. So we're really important about circularity in fashion, and how can we make that, how we can think of the end product, and what are we going to do with that end product, with our footwear, etc. So it's always a bit, it's always a little bit of a dilemma for us sometimes. And as a small independent brand, being able to source the actual, most sustainable materials that we can get for our products, it can be a little bit frustrating. But, hey, we soldier on. So, we got to try our best, don't we, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to that point about, if it is a £3.99 t-shirt, how much is that worker actually getting paid? So it's pretty scary stuff, really, in regards to fashion out there. Okay, great. Now, so what, I suppose, Belle, you're quite the activist as well, out there. What can we do, to do our part to try and, improve, the state of this sustainable fashion, and whether we're an individual, and you were saying it's also sort of a community effort in how we can do our part to help?
I really, do you know what? I mean, Sasha, you've probably been asked this question 1,000 times. What can we do now?
Yeah.
And I've gone from, shop ethically, educate yourself, to continue to shop ethically, because that's absolutely crucial. If you believe, like we all here believe, that animals shouldn't be suffering for our fashion, there's no way we're about to go out and buy, new leather, particularly from what I've seen of the industry and how it treats the animals within it. I've now got to the point where you need to do a little bit of everything, to be honest. You need to model new ways of being with your ethical and sustainable consumption, completely accepting that you're never going to get it perfect, because we live in an imperfect world. Mm-hmm. You need to be an activist, because activism, as far as we can still be activists with this new policing bill, activism broadcasts the issue to a wider audience. That's the value of, there's two major values of activism for me. You find your community on the streets, it's unbelievable, but you also tell people who are passing by, literally, or on the news, that this is an issue that we all need to start thinking about. There's a reason why activism has managed to turn so many movements, and I think that's really why. There's the political aspect. I think if you can join a community, a like-minded community, that's absolutely key, because then you'll start to feel, campaigns develop and move, and you're contributing. There's a new element now that I would add to it, and this is quite a big ask, and I wouldn't ask it unless we were in an emergency. If you are employed in a really damaging industry, you need to get out. So if you feel you can turn it from the inside, for God's sakes, try. You know, that's a hard battle. I've had people say, I really love it, but I'm really worried. And actually the insider job, the insider role is the hardest role of all. It's a lot easier to sit on panels and sit on the street, to be honest, than to sit in an unsympathetic work environment and go, have we thought about doing this? But if you don't feel you can change it from the inside, we need to all now transition ourselves to regenerative, adaptive, resilient industries. We need to be using all of our amazing talents and skill, and I say this specifically to the fashion industry, which is packed full of creativity and innovation, and we need to be working in better places. You know, we need to be upscaling the great initiatives. We need to be looking at system and culture change. You know, you need to leave a bad job and go and find a good job if you can. I know that's not possible for everyone. I really know that. But if you can, if that is even an option, find a good place to be and then prepare for the future.
I really agree with that, Val, because I was obviously working for an industry where I felt out of place. And I did have an idea that I'm going to change it from the inside. But, you know, Stella McCartney can do that. But I was a copywriter in big, huge corporations. And I did try many times to suggest bringing in more attention towards veganism and issues in the fashion industry. But in the end, I just felt like this industry is not the place where my passions and skills are best used. So I think that's really good advice for those who can. And obviously, once again, that is not a possibility for everyone, but those who want to get out and should. Yeah, it's a big question, and I do get asked that a lot as well. What can we do? And it's great that people want to do something, and I recognize that feeling of wanting to be active in some way. Like when I finished reading Eating Animals, I really felt like I need to do something about this. I cannot just continue my day-to-day life knowing that I did nothing. I think there's so many great ways to have an impact, not only through your individual choices, but also through making your voice heard, through having conversations, being active on social media and using that, which is a huge power, to share messages, to talk to other people, to maybe talk to the brands where you used to shop and voice your concerns, get involved with groups. There's lots of different ways to be an activist. And I think it starts with finding like-minded people and uniting together, coming together.
Yeah, and I can imagine actually, Sasha, at the time when you were trying to change things, you know, veganism was much less sort of accepted and talked about. So I can't imagine how challenging that must have been. Even from sort of a, you know, if I'd found out about leather whilst being a fashion editor, I actually don't know how I would have coped and continued to, you know, oh my gosh, and just from a mental health sort of perspective, I would have found it incredibly challenging. I do think, I'll just do a quick plug for VegFest, but I do think there is a talk coming up, I'm not sure when, which is called Animal Advocacy Careers. And I remember looking at that in the program last night, so maybe check that out as well.
Great, that sounds amazing.
Oh, it happens to be the one that got cancelled. But look, it's an organization. No. Yes. Sorry, Pete. It's an organization that exists. So find the organization, you know, and I'm sure it'll be on the next Global Veg Fest as well.
Because I think, you know, so many people say, you know, oh gosh, it's just me, and what as an individual difference am I going to make? And I think, you know, when I started back in vegan fashion, you know, 15 years ago, my God, there was nothing there out for us, you know, and I'd go talk to factories about, oh, could you make this shoe and not leather? And they think, my God, it's plastic, and what are you doing that for? And I mean, the number of doors they got slammed in my face, but, you know, resilience, you know, let's keep going. And, you know, all these years on, you know, we're not seen so much as, you know, these crazy vegan people making plastic shoes. It's actually, you know, we have value, and we have, you know, a story, and we, you know, it's ethics behind what we're doing. And it's great to see sort of the innovations that are happening, you know, with sustainable fashion and innovation in fabrics, and, you know, tons of sort of positivity, you know, but we still got a long way to go. I think it's time to sort of wrap up. I think we're coming to the end of our time. It's gone very quickly. So I think, do you have any final words, to save?
Yeah, I am. I'm still phenomenally grateful to organisations like VegFest, to people like Sasha, a real pioneer, to all the undercover investigators, who are really starting to tell the stories of the animals that we've ignored it for so long.
Yeah.
And I think, I think more and more people within my circle are starting to go, what has been happening? And I am so grateful for that. I don't care how distressing it is. It needs to be confronted. You can't change it if you don't know it.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to a time where we start to really question our relationship with animals and treat them with just a bit more respect and care and concern in the next, 10 to 20 years. Really, I'm looking forward to that.
Perfect. Thank you. And Sasha?
I saw that we have a question, actually.
Do we?
Paul is asking, do the panelists think it's okay for someone on a fully plant-based diet to wear an old woolen jumper or use an old woolen blanket?
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer that. I get this question a lot. This is going to be a bit of a controversial opinion, but I believe it's actually perfectly fine. Because first of all, you had that item before you went vegan. And secondly, what are the alternatives? We need to consider, like, what are we going to do with this jumper if we decide that, you know what, I don't want to wear wool anymore. So the way I see it, you have three options. Either you could, I think it's okay to sell it. If you don't feel comfortable keeping the money, you can always donate it. If you want to donate it to a charity, there are like issues with donating too much to charity shops. But if it's just the one jumper, I think that's an okay choice, or to give it to someone. But if you keep wearing it, I think it's okay. It doesn't make you any less vegan. It just makes you less wasteful, which is something that we all need to be. As the equivalent of a garbage truck of textiles is burned or sent to landfill every second. So if you have an old woolen jumper, I think it's actually, you can keep wearing it. And then when it will reach the end of its lifespan, which will happen one day, you could just replace it with an ethically produced or secondhand vegan one. So yeah, I think those are my closing words would be that there are no perfect vegans. And because as we said earlier, we don't live in a perfectly vegan world or perfectly ethical world, but we can all do our best for a better planet and the kinder fashion industry.
Yeah, and I agree wholly there. We can only try and do our best, and I think there is more positivity towards veganism. I think if people just view about what we're trying to achieve, with equality to people and animals and the planet, etc., versus trying to sort of I shouldn't say this, but be a little bit harsh towards us. We do have sort of an ethics behind what we're doing, but we're not perfect. We're never going to say we're perfect, but we can all just do our best, and I think that's all we can ask of each other, can't we?
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me, Belle and Sasha. And thanks for VegFest for having us. And Katrina, who's asleep in Australia, for having us as well today. And we look forward to catching up again soon. Thanks so much.